knowing your story doesn't mean memorizing your story. It's like being who you are, knowing who you are, knowing where you've been, and like being able to articulate it in any different dynamic situation.
With all these interviews, you only get so much time, right? So how do you figure out like a 3-minute pitch of your whole life
Yeah.
to somebody that works across multiple layers in any company, right?
That's the big piece. Like, and here's why I'm here today. Like, I think that's the piece that a lot of people miss is like, so yeah, and that's what I did. But it's like it's an always be closing situation almost.
I had a glass of wine, I sat down and I tried to tell my story to myself.
All right, everybody, welcome back to our little podcasting project that we have going on. My name's Ben Hawes.
My name's Alyssa Pizarro.
And we are talking just all about our careers, being, millennials in the workplace, the expectations versus reality on, being a human and making it work. So today, our topic today is really around our own paths around job hunting, our own paths around the job market, kind of what we expected versus what ended up happening and how we found ourselves in our current jobs. If that's helpful to you, we'd love for you to stick around. For me, I will tell my story quickly of, just the last 2 years. I ended up losing a job in January 2024. It was a very mutual losing of the job, I will say. It was one of those situations where it wasn't a fit, and I found myself unhappy, a lot of uncertainty in the job, a lot of disagreement with the direction of the way things were being sold and the way things were going. And it just ended up being something where I was excited to move on to my next thing. They were excited to move on to somebody else in the same role. And I ended up doing some job hunting for the duration of 2024. But I was being fairly picky, very fairly just kind of making sure I was only applying for things that aligned with me. And then I ended up deciding to go full time with my photo booth business. And so that was around mid 2024. I was like, I'm just going to do my business. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. And then that lasted for about a year of my just total entrepreneurship. And then I ended up in late 2025 thinking, let me find a part-time job. And then I did find a part-time job, and we'll get into it. But I'm really happy with where I am now, and the part-time job has actually become full-time. Alyssa, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your last couple of months or years?
Yeah, I spent the last decade across many different tech marketplaces in the Bay Area and in New York. Um, I spent the last 4 years at one company in particular, and as that tenure came to an end, I was scared. I was really scared about the volatility in the marketplace today. But also, I think I was nervous because I knew I had to be more selective than I've ever had to be. So when you're coming into the market as an individual looking for a job and you have to be selective and then the market's being selective as well, like that's a very scary thing because it just doesn't feel like the odds are in your favor, right? And so when my time came at the beginning of this year and I knew I had to figure out how I was gonna make my next move, head into my next chapter, because I found myself all of a sudden not in a job and found myself unemployed for the first time ever, even though it was a relatively mutual decision at the time. I was scared, but I knew I had to take an aggressive approach. So spent a lot of time interviewing. The culture in interviewing right now is quite wild. I had some companies where it was 4 rounds. I had some companies where it was 10 rounds. And I found myself for one company interviewing over the course of 2.5 months and spending over 80 hours and multiple presentations worth of time all to get to the final mile and for it to not work out,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very hard not to take those things personally, right? But I knew it was all a statistics game, right? How much could I figure out how to optimize my job search? I found a lot of lessons and how to use LinkedIn, how to use built-in,
Mm-hmm.
how to make connections that actually mattered, that were going to help me continue to grow in my career and not just be another follower or connect on LinkedIn. And, through all those highs and lows, I eventually found a position that I couldn't be more grateful for and feel like it's probably the best fit in my entire career because, again, I stopped trying to be what I thought these companies wanted me to be and instead got really good at telling my own story
Mm,
and sharing that and looking for a company that immediately valued that
mhm.
and felt like a community or a culture that I could see myself being a part of authentically. So I'm really grateful, but of course there were times where imposter syndrome set in, where I felt like even though I knew it wasn't personal, it felt personal
Yeah.
and I had to pick myself up and keep going, and I think having a strong network, like having you, having other people in my life to turn to, and say like, "Okay, lost another one, let's move on," it was just really helpful to remind myself that I am an incredible talent and I do have this wonderful community and you can't do it by yourself all the time either. So it was very much my own journey, but I think that's also why you and I have come together because we were going through this at similar times and we both got to experience what it was like to be wanted by a company for 100% of what we were and
Mhm.
what we were advertising as our brands and what we could offer to a business. It's kind of like, selling your own confidence to a company
Yeah.
unapologetically,
Yeah.
and what a beautiful experience to actually be sought after for that, right? You don't expect that, and the first time it really happens to you, you're like, "Oh, is this real? When is the other shoe going to drop?" But it can actually be a beautiful work-life balance where you are the centerpiece creating that balance in your own life.
Yeah, and I think the thing that you're hitting on the most that really resonates with me is the whole thing around telling your story, and, like,
Mm.
being able to brand yourself as maybe dirty of a word that feels to some people because 'cause we're humans, but, like,
Yeah.
be able to tell your story and to be able to, like, stomp on, like, the points that matter. Like, I
Mhm.
remember when and then I wanna ask you some tips, like, just to get, like, kind of, like, deeper into, like, telling your story. Like you said, I got really good at telling my story, and I wanna know more about how you got really good at telling your story. But I always remember in my first phone interview, um, for this job that I have now, and I opened it up. He said, "Tell me about yourself," or whatever. I opened it up by saying, "Well, I am an experienced creator." Like, I just started
Mhm.
and the
Mhm.
reason I say that is because throughout my career, started in customer experience, and then I moved to employee experience, and then I moved to sales for an employee experience, all of this. And what I care about most throughout the through line is that I care about people and how they experience the world and how they experience their
Mhm.
roles. And it just felt right to me to start off with that and to just be like, this is who I am. I'm an experienced creator. It aligns with my photo booth business, it aligns with my comedy, it aligns with everything that I do professionally, and it just really landed with me, but I know that I can go even further as I want to build a speaking career, as I want to build even more of a brand around my podcasting and things like that. So I
Mhm.
would love to know from you, first of all, how you explained yourself, and your story in your recent interviews, which were fairly recent, and then how you like got good at telling your story.
Yeah, I think, in telling my story over the years, a lot of it was just practice
Mhm,
and, learning from interviewing with different, levels of people within a company, whether
mhm,
that be CEO and founder all the way down to pure level.
mhm,
Everybody wants to hear a different version of someone's background,
mhm,
and I think folks get very overwhelmed of, "Okay, how am I when they ask me to tell them about myself, how do I tailor it to them in the moment?" And I think that that adds such a layer of anxiety. So the first thing I did was, sit down with myself and almost treat it like a creative writing project. How do I tell my background, right? Y and I also wanted to be mindful of, with all these interviews, you only get so much time, right? So how do you figure out, like, a 3-minute pitch of your whole life
Yeah.
to somebody that works across multiple layers in any company, right? So I sat down and, I actually had this professor in grad school who said, "Write drunk, edit sober." So I had a glass of wine, I sat down, and I tried to tell my story to myself. And I had to be honest with myself about what made sense, what felt unnecessary, right? And then I called some of my friends in my network and I said, "Let me tell you my story. Please give me feedback." And that was a scary thing to do. Nobody wants to be given feedback on who they are. That's
Yeah.
probably one of the most vulnerable things. But I knew I was reaching out to people that not only I loved, but I respected,
Mm,
who, I had made, friendships with throughout my career and were former coworkers who've now climbed the ladder at Uber, at Meta, at all these different companies, right? So I wanted diverse perspective. I asked for opinion. They helped, provide that to me, and some of that feedback was complimentary, some of it was contradictory. So
mhm.
I also had to sit down and figure out what was the version I was most comfortable with. And I think the thing about storytelling and, like, sharing your background is a lot of people feel like they have to give their whole resume when they tell that story, and that's actually not what most interviewers are looking for,
Yeah.
and I can say that with pretty strong confidence as
Yeah.
I've interviewed over hundreds of people across dozens and dozens of roles across several industries in the last decade as a leader myself. I'm not looking ever for, somebody to tell me their resume. I have the resume. I
Mhm.
have the LinkedIn. I can read that and interpret it myself. What I'm trying to get a sense of is someone's character,
Mhm.
and how they represent themselves, right? The one thing we're supposed to know better than anything else is our own story, our own selves,
Mhm.
right? So it's funny to me that I have a lot of people who come to me and say, the hardest thing I have is telling my own story."
Mhm.
And I think it becomes this bigger conversation I have with people about, well, if you can't tell your own story, how can you tell the story of a business that
Mhm.
you haven't learned yet?
Mhm.
Right? So when I sit down and I think about that, what I wanna do is similar to the start of a book. It's all about that hook, like what you had said, say it again. What was the statement you started your phone
Experience
interview with?
experience creator.
"I'm
I
an
am.
experience creator."
Yeah.
That's such a hook,
Mhm.
right? For me, it's I've spent the last 10 years in tech marketplaces across, the US,
Mhm.
learning in every industry I possibly can, and I've become a professional learner, and I'm looking forward to leaning into that more, you know? I don't like to start any conversation, where I'm telling my background,
Mhm.
as too overconfident either, I think you still have to be able to convey, compassionate humility, because
Mhm.
nobody wants somebody who knows everything.
Yeah.
If they did, most businesses wouldn't be able to operate because people wouldn't be able to collaborate and learn from each other,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
one thing I focus on selling is, the fact that I've been a professional learner my entire life,
Mhm.
the fact that I've moved from industry to industry in a very agile way, and that's allowed me to develop hard skill sets, um, that complement my emotional intelligence and soft skills that I can bring into the market. And then also, I think it's good to call out, you don't wanna sit there and tell 10 years of your life. You
Yeah.
wanna give a overview of framing of, "This is where I came from," and a summary in my background.
Yeah.
That should take the first minute, and then the remaining 2 minutes should focus on your most relevant role and,
Yeah.
specific experience you have that's related to the role that you're interviewing for. So, I usually give an arch story, and then I lean into, well, the last 4 years, I was working in this position where I was able to oversee XYZ.
Mhm.
It brought XYZ value to the company, which has led me to pursuing the role within your business, and
Right.
here's why it's relevant,
That
right?
that's the big piece, like, and here's why I'm here today. Like, I think that's the piece that a lot of people miss is like, "So, yeah, and that's what I did." But it's like it's an always be closing situation almost. Like, it's almost like
Yeah, it is salesy,
yeah,
right? It is very salesy, and
yeah,
that's why I say, like, tell it as a story,
yeah.
right? An arc has to have a completion point as
Mhm,
well,
mhm.
right? And uh, you need to let people know, why are you here? But
Yeah,
also, like, if if you're ever at a social event, right, like you're hanging out with friends, you're meeting new people, think about that being the context of your interview. Imagine there's a drink in your hand and you're just telling a story.
yeah.
Like, you want to leave them with a feeling of wanting more out of
Mhm,
you, right?
mhm.
Oh man, that person was so interesting.
Yeah,
I really want to ask them more questions and like hear more of their stories, right?
mhm.
So
Yeah,
like everybody gets so in their head about this and like, what's the next question they're going to ask me? Let go of that a little bit because you can't control it.
yeah,
What you can control is knowing yourself well enough
yeah.
and leaving them wanting to spend more time with you.
Mhm.
Like, if you've already made the interview, you've qualified in the skill set.
Yeah,
Stop focusing on your skill set qualification, focus on your storytelling and being a desirable person that somebody wants to spend more time with,
mhm.
right?
Yeah. I think also for me, it's like the confidence piece is really important,
Mm,
because I early on, even when I was in college and I would go to interviews at shoe stores and things like that, like, I always identified that nerves would be the thing that would block me. Like,
mm,
I get nervous and I can't tell this story, or if I get nervous and I, like, freeze up or whatever, like, that's gonna stop me, and so I personally have been able to just overcome, like, interview nerves just by
mm,
knowing that fact, but I know that's not the case for everybody. I know people get so nervous, they've practiced this thing, they're trying to regurgitate lines from a play that they've written about their story, and, like, I think it's really interesting to think about when you're sitting there in the interview talking to people, how can you get yourself more comfortable? How can you get yourself to be authentic and to be your true self and, like, not to perform something that you've rehearsed, but to have a real
mm.
conversation? I think that is one of the biggest pieces around telling your story that's tough for me because to me, I can't regurgitate things as much as I like being an actor or singing songs that I've written and things like that. In a professional context, if I'm asked to memorize something and share it, I just can't. I have to know it really well and then say what comes to my heart at the moment. So, like,
Mhm,
me telling my story is very much about reading the room. It's very much about, like, connecting with the person in front of me as well, and also connecting with the role that I'm applying for. And so it's been really interesting because one time I was, watching all of these YouTube videos just like this one here today, just talking about like how tell me about yourself. And then well, first whatever the advice was in 2017. And I called my mom similar to and I was like, can you just listen to me like tell my story and say what I'm going to say when they say, tell me about yourself. And I go and I'm about a minute in, she says, stop. My mom was like, stop. This is not going to get you a job. Like, you are just imitating something that you don't even believe in, and, like, you need to, like, completely reframe this whole thing because 'cause you're just yapping, yapping, yapping about all these things that you've done, and it was a really good
mhm,
'cause it's a lot of what you're saying. It's like, know the hook, know the arch of the story, all the arc of the story, all of the things that and then you can get into, like, some details about accomplishments and skills and all of that, and then closing. But it's been a really interesting journey for me, the "tell me about yourself" question, because th I could go on, like, I could go on for about yourself.
Yeah, I think too, just going back to the nerves aspect of
Yeah,
it, because it is hard for a lot of folks, and, a lot of my clients or my network, often call me right before that first interview, even if they've practiced a million times, right? And they're just nervous. I think a couple of things that I recommend to folks, yes, practice the story. The more you try to treat an interview like a Mad Libs you're
yeah,
filling in, the more awkward it's gonna be, and it's gonna feel like you're reading a Mad Libs,
Yeah.
not like you're being authentic,
Mhm.
right? So I think my first advice is know your story and know 3 to 5 relevant work examples
Yeah.
that you can have on a piece of paper and reference if you really need, right? You don't need to know every single situation because what's going to happen if you do get the job, you
Mhm.
can't rehearse before every meeting.
No.
You
Yeah.
can't be
Yeah.
rehearsing between every connect.
Mhm.
You have to be able to stand on your own and be human and work through those problems in a very real way. So I think about interviewing the same way. Know who you are and know a couple of examples, but don't try to stick to a rigid format. Otherwise, you start to sound like a Mad Libs, and
Yeah.
nobody wants to sound like that. And then I think the other thing is sometimes people just have anxiety. I suffer from generalized anxiety disorder. I take medication for that. I'm very proud for what I do for my mental health.
Yeah.
So one thing I do recommend to folks is create a playlist of the songs that were your best dance song, the songs that make the hair on the back of your neck stand up with such good energy, right? And the 5 minutes before an interview, shut out the world, play your favorite song, and dance as much as you can,
Yeah.
and get the physical out. Bring yourself out of your head and back into your body.
Yeah.
You know, I think we're so cerebral all the time. I think remote work culture and remote interviewing has brought us so much into this like cerebral sense of self that we forget to just be the humans we are and shake it off and be present. Right. So, I had one of my mentees call me last Monday because she had an interview and she knows her story. She's done everything right. This is a great fit for her, but she was very nervous, so I told her, "Pick out that, best booty poppin' song that you have
Yeah.
and shake it out
Mm.
for a minute before the interview so that you really can feel your body, and it brings you back down to earth, and it helps shake off a lot of that anxiety as well."
Yeah. Anxiety is so physical sometimes, and it's like that kind of interview anxiety, like, it's so opposite from sitting in a chair that doing just movement, even the power pose kind of stuff and, like, just kind of, like, move but, like, I think dancing is the ultimate power pose, first of all. Uh I think that's a good place to move on to
I
our topic, which is all about kind of going deeper into people's paths. And I think we can speak specifically to people who are talking about or who are applying for different positions and like deciding where they want to go next and weaving that into like knowing our story. One of the things I took away from this episode is like knowing your story doesn't mean memorizing your story. It's like being who you are, knowing where you've been, and like being able to articulate it in any different dynamic situation. So I think like it would be cool for our next episode to go on and talk about just like our paths and like where we thought we might go, where we ended up, and all of that stuff. So let's move on. My name's Ben,
My name's Alyssa.
and let's go to the next episode. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you.
We'll be back next week.